so many questions, like how much contact did Team Trump have with Russia before and after the president took office? Were sensitive details about a North Korean missile launch discussed openly at President Trump's private club? And are constituents at town hall meetings across the country paid protesters or angry voters? Republican Congressman Tom McClintock has been holding some of those town meetings. He represents the 4th District in California. Congressman McClintock, thank you for talking with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about what I think is fair to call a kind of chaotic start to the Trump administration. There are now several investigations being talked about. One would focus on investigating Mike Flynn and really the Trump team's involvement with Russia, if there is any. Would you support an investigation into that?
Well, my principal concern is what this is doing to American diplomacy. The politicization of the nation's intelligence agencies and the deliberate leaking of confidential conversations between our president and other heads of state is a very, very dangerous thing. That will affect not only this presidency, but future presidencies as well. If world leaders cannot, in confidence, talk to the leader of our nation for fear that their words will be leaked by a politicized intelligence agency, that communication stops, and that can become very, very dangerous very rapidly.
Do you think there should be an investigation into that?
Yes, I do.
And who should run that investigation?
Well, I think Congress should run that investigation as using its oversight authority.
Would you support investigating not just Mike Flynn, but also members of the Trump team before President Trump took office and sort of up to this point?
That's already incorporated in the FBI investigation of Russian hacking, and that's where I think is the appropriate avenue to pursue. I do think that we need to ask if there was a FBI wiretap on Michael Flynn, how could that information have been leaked to the press?
If there was an FBI wiretap on Michael Flynn, and if in fact the White House knew that Michael Flynn might be ripe for being blackmailed or whatever, how could he continue to be in meetings where there was obviously confidential, sensitive information?
My principal concern is that in discussions with the Russian ambassador, or any ambassador for that matter, the ambassador has to be confident that what is being said will not be leaked to the press.
Third investigation that's been proposed is to look into what seems to be, at least maybe not confidential information, but some kind of secure information at Mar-a-Lago, where President Trump was with the Japanese Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. Do you think there should be an investigation into what happened there? Certainly plenty of people who were at that event talked about open conversations about what was going on, focusing specifically on North Korea documents.
Yes, I do.
What are the concerns that you have with the Trump White House?
My concern is with a lot of hysteria and ankle biting that is specifically intended to obstruct the administration from developing and implementing the policies that they were elected to implement. I told the president, you know, nobody has complained that you've broken any campaign promises. All of the attacks are because you're keeping your campaign promises. My advice to the president would be stay the course.
Let's talk a little bit about the town halls. You've done, I think, 100.
Yeah, more than 100, yeah.
Yeah, so they, I think, generally are pretty calm, maybe is a good word to use. This last one around.
They'll get some tempestuous sometimes. You know, I've done these throughout the lifespan of the not only the Tea Party, but also the Occupy Wall Street movement. But this was the first time a police department determined that I needed an armed escort to leave the venue.
What do you think was going on? I mean, as you know,
I think most people came there simply because they are, very much opposed to the Trump administration, and they wanted to express that. But I think there was also a group that came there to disrupt the meeting, and they did.
Do you think they were paid protesters?
I don't know. Again, I think a lot of it is grassroots activists, but I do think it's being, very well organized and coordinated.
Congressman McClintock, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You bet.